Welcome back to another episode of Creative Thaumaturgy. This is our RPG talk show, and there's a lot to talk about, especially in the realm of D&D.
Before we start, I just wanted to explain time. Time is a flat disk, and it seems that we're kind of stuck on this cycle, right? Where we're going through iterations of the same thing over and over and over again, right?
Right.
And I hear myself, as I said many kalpas ago, have you tried not playing D&D? That's our topic for today because recently, as anyone who's plugged into the RPG, industry knows, the Exarchs of the Coast decided that they were going to rescind, rewrite, and reformat their open gaming license, the OLG. Tell me, how much do you know about the OLG? How much do you know about the OGL?
As I understand it, the OGL is basically what allows Paizo and Pathfinder to exist. You can use the D&D rules and create your own D&D game, and then create your own setting, and then publish it and make money and be your own thing. But then we call them the Exarchs of the Coast affectionately. The Exarchs are evil wizards from Mage the Awakening
That rule
who
reality with an
that
iron
rule
fist.
reality
Yep.
with an iron fist. You play their game, or else they delete you from existence. And that's kind of what, ironically, the Wizards of the Coast have done by forcing everybody to give them money now. I think Paizo. I think I heard Paizo wants to sue because they've retroactively changed the license, and now they want a finger in all the different pies. They want all the OGL people to pay them money, and then for them to be able to use the content that they create without paying any royalties back to the original creators.
Yeah, that's a good summary of it. Basically, on top of that, right? The OGL is also why the OSR exists, right? What had happened was in the early 2000s when WotC decided to buy the rights to Dungeons and Dragons from the failing TSR. They had basically put out this license saying that you could use their rules however you want to create your own material for it, as long as you don't use specific IP related stuff. And as long as you publish the OGL at the end of your book or somewhere within your text, it was yours, right? You could use the rules for free. You didn't have to pay any royalties, no nothing. And the basic idea behind this, from what I understand from people who are in the know, was that Wizards wanted to create a large catalog, 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons material, and they thought that they could kind of off-source the risk, right, for different settings and other supplements, off-source that risk to other companies, but in return kind of have a guaranteed selling point. That is, they would sell the core rules and the core supplements that other people couldn't publish per se, but they would instead use their access to the IP to create other things like worlds, settings, adventures, etc., etc., etc. At the end of the day, the idea is that, okay, people are going to buy the WotC stuff to play this other stuff. So the OGL has remained in its original form since Wizards released it back in the 2000s. And part of that license has been section, I believe, 1.0A, which states that the people who publish under that license will never lose access to that license. It will never be rescinded, altered, or whatever. Right? So it's in that license is words saying that it will never be changed. All right, there's been a obviously a lot of outrage over the
Mhm.
new OGL
This
license.
this last week has been filled with a lot of people not knowing what to do, right? Because Wizards of the Coast is bad, but I really like D&D. What do I do?
Well,
Do we
dear
boycott?
listener,
That's not gonna happen.
we have the solution for you. Have you tried not playing D&D? As I said earlier, have you tried that? You know, you can boycott Wizards of the Coast without boycotting your hobby. There are other games out there, and if you are really afraid, right, really afraid of getting too far away from the rules you know and love, you can play that game. You can play a Dungeons and Dragons like game without giving any money to Wizards of the Coast.
What we're gonna try and do is try and recommend, or at least give some notice to some of the other games, starting with some fantasy games that are closer to D&D, and then moving away into the weirder stuff later. But I know, Tristan, you really like OSR, which is
Yes.
D&D but not. I think all the OSR stuff exists because of the previous OGL license, right? So if you really want to show support for the people who make the OGL stuff, you just try playing D&D in the OSR.
Absolutely. I mean, remember when I said time is like a flat disk? The OSR exists because of a similar situation, right? OSR stands for a bunch of different things, actually. Old school Renaissance, old school Revolution, old school rule set, old school rules. Realizing that the OGL applies to every edition of D&D, including first and second edition and older editions than that, TSR, the original creators of the game, came out with. And you've seen since 4th edition came out, a whole smattering of creators, third-party creators, coming out with new versions or new clones or even new material based off of the older versions of the game, right? It could be like a straight-up retro clone, like Old School Essentials, which is basically one-for-one the same rule set as the basic expert edition of Old School D&D. It has everything you'd expect from it. It even has kind of an expansion that allows some of the first edition AD&D stuff to get into that rule set. So if you want more options and more of a slightly modern take, you can add those in without really undermining the game as a whole. But there's other weirder ones out there too, right? You can go beyond just the existing retro clone stuff. You could, for example, play something like Worlds Without Number. Worlds Without Number is a game from a publisher called Sign Nomine Publishing. And the idea behind it is that it's meant for fantasy role-playing games set in kind of like a Dying Earth type setting, but you can really use it for anything that's fantasy. It uses the same basic formulation of old school gaming, but it also has some more modern stuff in there too, like, 5th edition players know about like backgrounds and feats and things like that. Worlds Without Number kind of have those elements in it. So you'll feel kind of more, comfortable with it because it has a lot of the same things as before. But it's also a very well-written system, very robust, and not overly complicated. It's rather easy to pick up. I ran it a couple weeks ago with people who had never played it before.
Okay, so what about somebody who doesn't want to play D&D anymore, but they still want to play a fantasy game?
I mean, there's a wealth of different games out there. But, if you still want to get that kind of dark fantasy feel, I'm sure most people who are in this scene have heard of Warhammer. They probably heard of Warhammer 40k, but I'm talking about Warhammer Fantasy, the original one. And what do you know? Warhammer Fantasy has a role-playing game called the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Have you ever heard of that one?
I have, and I think I was in one session that either you or Cody ran, and I believe I spent all of it asleep on a raft. it was, I don't know if this was before Dance with Dragons came out or after, but it felt like a Tyrion simulator to me.
Huh. Well, that's weird.
Because I just spent the whole
Oh
thing
wait,
of asleep on a raft on a river.
I do remember that. I thought you were just having some kind of weird fever dream, but I do remember that now. Um, what does Warhammer Fantasy have that D&D doesn't? Well, first off, it's set in the pre-existing Warhammer Fantasy setting, so the old world, you know, kind of Holy Roman Empire based. What's kind of neat about it is that it doesn't focus on like really heroic characters. In fact, most of the time you're going to be working class or poor.
Isn't there
And
like a role for ugliness in the game?
there is a rule for what sort of flaws your character has. They tend to be physical unless you're an elf, in which case they tend to be mental flaws. Uh, but yeah, it's what's kind of neat is that it's all about kind of like lower, smaller street level stuff, right? You're not some grand hero who's thwarting the orc warlord. You're probably a rat catcher who's investigating rumors about rats that walk like men, but you know those don't exist, right? They don't exist. You're earning pennies rather than gold pieces, and you're just trying to make it from day to day. Which is why you're adventuring, because you know it's hard to make it in the old world where there's plagues and famines and chaos invasions. You know, every other year. Now, on the other hand, if you do want something more heroic, right? And I'm talking about over, maybe not over the top, but like very fantasy, very mystical. I would suggest RuneQuest.
What's RuneQuest? I feel like I've heard of it before in like a random Lindy Beige video.
It's actually hard to fully encapsulate RuneQuest because it's one of those games and it has its own setting that are very, very nuanced. I don't want to say complicated or like heavy meta plot based. It's just a really well put together world. So much so that the world itself, it's called Glorantha, actually has 3 different role playing games for it. RuneQuest is just one of those 3 different role playing games. And the setting itself has a lot of fans. But the basic idea behind the RuneQuest Glorantha game, or any game set in Glorantha, is that it's kind of like this Bronze Age mythic setting, right? And it was written originally by Greg Stafford, who passed away very recently, sadly, who is one of the people who founded Chaosium, the company that brought us also the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. And he was originally a mythologist, right? He went to school to study how ancient Bronze Age people thought, how they structured their myths, how their religions worked, and he made a setting based on that. It's very similar to how, say, J.R.R. Tolkien, who is a linguist, came up with these very vast and rich linguistic and storied histories and decided, oh, hey, well, I'm going to start telling stories with these. Well, Greg Stafford came up with a bunch of these different like mythic stories and legendary cycles and decided to throw them together into their own world. So you play as a character who is kind of like a Bronze Age person and has this kind of sort of mythic understanding of the world. I'm honestly appreciating it more and more each day because it's really cool. It's really in depth. It's not like the whole, oh yes, thunder there, that must be Thor or Zeus. No, you've got whole entire like mystery cults based around, okay, what does it mean to be thunderous, and what is the mythic meaning of adventure? Part of the game involves literally going into mythic time, if that makes any sense. There's this element of what are called hero quests, where you participate in a ritual, but you're also changing or participating in mythic time as well, and so you can have this cosmic level adventure go on at the same time as a more like human level adventure.
That's the fantasy side of your alternatives, but let's talk about non-fantasy, Because one of the things I've noticed a lot with people who play a lot of D&D and then look for recommendations for other games or tweaks or house rules to make D&D more fun for them is that they want to play non-fantasy in D&D. They want to play a cyberpunk game or a modern mystery, or they want to play Call of Cthulhu, which I unfortunately can't recommend because I have never played it, and it would be irresponsible to do so.
I can recommend it.
Okay, we'll get to Call of Cthulhu later, but there's a lot of people who play D&D and they just want to play like a different setting or genre altogether, right? We've talked about Chronicles of Darkness stuff on this YouTube channel before. We've done one on Mage the Awakening. We've done a video on Vampire the Masquerade, and it's only a matter of time until we do one on Werewolf the Forsaken, because we're running a game right now, and we just finished our first Sisker Da, or the first Sacred Hunt as werewolves. But those have their own videos. Let's talk about other games other than Chronicles of Darkness stuff. I think
you have plenty of suggestions there.
Well, I'm thinking, okay, you like D&D, right? It would not be a leap to say that you're also a big fan of Reddit. You know, D&D, Reddit, they just go hand in hand. And if you really like Reddit, it's not a leap to say that you probably like Marvel movies. Right? When you think of
superheroes.
When you think about Reddit, you think about D&D, you think Marvel, that's so Reddit. Now, when you think about D&D, you think about Reddit. When you think about Reddit, you think Marvel. I mean, that's so Reddit, right? Well, there's an RPG for you. It's called Prowlers and Paragons. I've played this game a couple of times. Some of them with you, Tristan.
Yeah.
Some with some other friends. And every time I've played it, it's always been really fun because it is a superhero RPG, which is more rules light, which is how I think a superhero RPG has to be played. Because, for example, Spider-Man. How strong is Spider-Man, right? Who knows?
He has super strength.
He has super strength that wildly fluctuates to him having trouble busting through a wall in one issue to another issue where he's lifting a subway train car above his head with no effort at all. It's in flux, and so when you have something that's a bit less rules light, you're not looking at percentages, you're not rolling for like the exact distance in meters that your super speed is taking you. It creates a more natural, like, superhero kind of story where everyone can kind of go crazy but still stay within their limits. And one of the cool things about Prowlers and Paragons is just how modular it is. If your group all decide, for example, we want to play a Bat Family level, low power, enhanced human kind of story, you can do that. Or if you say, I want to do a Flash Family kind of super speedster, I run so fast that time ceases to exist kind of story, you can do that as well. The rules are very flexible for whatever story you want to do. And it's a lot of fun because, I mean, the nature of superheroes, you get to create your own names and costumes and just go wild.
It's a lot of fun. I remember my character very well. He was a...
Explain your character, because...
Should I?
Yeah,
Okay,
explain your superhero that you created.
Let's see here. In the game we played, we also had a friend of the show, Owen, with us. And he played a character named Gainicus, who was all about them gains. He got his power from interdimensional muscle gods. And I played as a bug chaser. I was a superhero who had contracted a disease that gave me superpowers. And I would be able to produce various diseases in my bodies and use them to fight crime.
You were like Spider-Man, except instead of shooting web, you would shoot snot.
Quite literally, actually. It worked out pretty well, because you'd get these guys all, rather than webbed up, they'd be all snotted.
I mean, yeah, that's the kind of thing that you can do in Prowlers and Paragon, and the kind of thing that people try to do in D&D already, right? Like they try to do those silly um I'm a bard, but I'm really a bear in disguise kind of characters.
Hmm.
Uh just play a game like Prowlers and Paragons where that's the norm, and you might have more fun with it. You mentioned Call of Cthulhu. I've not played it, but I've only heard good things about it.
Yeah, Call of Cthulhu. It has a good pedigree because it's almost as old as Dungeons and Dragons. It has a pretty straightforward system. It's very much like actually it's the exact same basic role playing system as RuneQuest is. Um, and it does a really good job emulating regular people stuck in uncovering mysteries they probably shouldn't be, right? In one campaign, I played as a freelance photographer. I know, big leap for me. Um, and over the course of it, he became more and more obsessed with occult lore, and he started researching into it more and more and more. And so, while his photography skill was really, really high and came in useful early on, the more he started to use his skills in other things, the more he started to develop them, and the character would shift over as a result. It's kind of neat how the system works. When you try new skills, every time you fail, or actually any time you use them, there's a chance you can learn them and increase them at the end of the session. And so, the worse your skill is, the more often you have a chance to increase it before it kind of levels out at a certain point. So it's kind of neat how it shows, like, through a character's experiences and through how they start to learn to react to the world, they start to change and develop. And there was a guy who we killed at least 5 different times, but he kept resurrecting over the course of the campaign. So that was fun. I think my character almost went insane. He did become obsessed with picking his nose. That's the other thing Call of Cthulhu's known for.
Picking your
Going
nose?
insane.
Oh,
And
okay.
developing manias.
Well, let's talk about video games for just a short little bit, because a lot of video games, a lot of popular video games out there right now are based off of tabletop RPGs. Of course, D&D has Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter and Icewind Dale, and then you have like Paizo has Pathfinder Kingmaker. There are other RPGs that get video games too, and if you've played those games, you might be familiar with them. Let's start with the elephant in the room, Cyberpunk.
Oh, yes.
Cyberpunk RED, which is a game set in the time between Cyberpunk 2020, like the original version, and Cyberpunk 2077, which is the game. So if you play that game, so if you really like Cyberpunk, I think Cyberpunk RED, last time I checked, was like number 1 or number 2 on the best sellers on Drive-Thru RPG. People love it because it's actually a really good game, and also people really like Cyberpunk Edgerunners.
Yes.
And it's funny because Cyberpunk Edgerunners is so, like, I don't want to say formulaic. It's more archetypical. Like, you kind of expect everything to happen in Cyberpunk Edgerunners that happens. You kind of see it coming, and that's kind of the point, because that's the typical story in Cyberpunk. When you play a game of Cyberpunk RED, your character is going to go through the same journey that David's going to go through, and probably end the same way too.
Yeah, it's a good system. Has high lethality, but not like to ridiculous levels, right? You have to be careful. You have to be smart. Everyone's armed with guns, including you. So don't get shot.
You can just shoot people in the face while walking down the street. It's fine. Who's gonna
Yeah.
stop you?
Well, I mean, it depends entirely what part of a city you're in. If you're in the, kind of middle class
They
neighborhoods,
have combat zones where you can just do that.
yeah.
Otherwise known in the real world as inner cities.
I was gonna say no-go zones, but that's spicier. I like that.
I was gonna say Detroit's.
Well, I mean, isn't Detroit where they're now, doing a lot of law under the mutual combat?
They have that?
They do, yeah, it's real.
Oh my god. We really do
Yeah.
live in a cyberpunk world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the whole idea is, if both people agree that they're fighting, then you can't charge the other guy for murder because he's just as liable as the guy who survived. Uh,
Oh my god, we do live in a cyberpunk world.
Cyberpunk is now. Other fun things you can do in Cyberpunk Red are sell out your friends, sell out your body, upgrade your body, um, slowly start to see the world and other people around you as just flesh puppets, and basically become a psychopath.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about Cyberpunk 2077 is how borged out V can be in the game compared to how detrimental it is to your health in the RPG. Like installing like an audio suite in your head is gonna like take you down several levels of empathy if you roll poorly. Whereas V just is a full Borg. But in the game, you have to really think about what cyberware you're gonna put in, and it's kind of like it's an eventuality. You will get cyberpsychosis.
Yeah, yeah.
I love the description in the book for how you deal with cyberpsychosis. It's like you go to the doctor where they assign you like what do they do? They like give you not just they don't just give you pills. I can't remember the description for it.
No, they do give you like certain therapeutic brain dances.
Yeah, yeah, they rewrite your they rewrite your brain. That's the only way to fix it.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a
Oh,
standard
I think it's like implied they give you lobotomies too to help like slow it down.
psychosurgery. Psychosurgery. That's not a lobotomy. Psychosurgery is the idea of um, doing surgery on a person's mind, memory, and thoughts by putting them into a state of suggestibility with various chemicals and, let's just say, mental stimuli. And that's something that comes up often in cyberpunk genres. Like Cyberpunk Red, actually any of the Cyberpunk role-playing game editions do a good job kind of capturing the essence of the genre. In my humble opinion.
Well, there's another cyberpunk game out there, a very wonderful video game called Shadowrun Dragonfall, Shadowrun Hong Kong, Shadowrun Returns. If you're familiar with those games, they of course have a tabletop called Shadowrun, and they're both Cyberpunk and Shadowrun are based off of Neuromancer, so a lot of like the terms in the games are the same. Like they'll say Netrunner, you get the phrase chum or chumbada or chummer, chum. They're very similar in that way, but Shadowrun's a very different setting because it is the concept of you have a cyberpunk world, which coincides with the turning of the ages. I think the Mayan calendar says that you enter the seventh age where magic returns. So you have cyborgs. Is it sixth?
It's the sixth world, yeah.
The sixth world, right? And then you get cyborgs and you get dragons. Everyone like starts to turn into like orcs and elves. So you get like you get trolls who are so big that they can afford to put on giant arm cannons and stuff. You have mages and shamans who are trying to like talk to the spirits of rats in a rat infested cyberpunk city, and of course giant corporations which are ruled by dragons and such. It's a really interesting setting.
And mind blood cults. Don't forget the mind blood cults.
Yeah, the Azteca corporation.
As technology, everyone's favorite megacorp.
It's a really fun setting. Gameplay wise, I would probably prefer Cyberpunk in terms of rules, but I haven't played Shadowrun in a very long time, so I don't know if it's changed since then.
I played the 6th edition, but the guy who ran it didn't understand the rules and decided to hybridize it with 5th edition, which is rather complicated.
Yeah, I think it's 5th edition that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I remember the most fun I had playing Shadowrun was just taking the quick start sheet that just tells you how to use the D10s. It's like a single page PDF. I was like, hey, let's just do this. and it was a lot more fun than dealing with the rest of the rules. Um, but Shadowrun is a great game. It's a great setting, and you might be familiar with it already. So go ahead and jump in.
And I mean, it does, for a number of reasons, have overlap with D&D, right? Someone best described it as like Dungeons and Dragons, but in a cyberpunk future. Because you have all those fantasy elements.
Yeah,
Still
but the
have that kind
fantasy
of
elements
idea.
are just a lot more serious and a lot more into the occultism than D&D is.
That's true, but I was thinking kind of like you do also get that overlap with the whole dungeon crawling aspect, except in this case you're not doing a dungeon crawl so much as you're breaking into facilities or
You're shadow running,
shadow running,
edge
yes.
running.
Edge running. Well, where do you think Shadowrun got the name?
Is that what they? I've never read Neuromancer. Do they call people runners in
They
Neuromancer?
call them runners. Yes, they call them runners. Because the idea is that you're you know, someone who's a deniable asset. Like, you also actually no, it's not Neuromancer. You know where you get the term runner from? So like a edge runner
Blade
or a
Runner.
shadow runner. Unironically, from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, because the original edition of Cyberpunk, today known as Cyberpunk 2013, it was heavily based on Blade Runner. And
Oh my god, that was 27 years ago, 2013.
Yeah. That's what I kind of like about Cyberpunk, though, is that it was originally written to extrapolate into the future. Like, I think it was written in early 1990 or late 1980s.
I think it was. I thought it was an 80s book.
It must be an 80s book, because in the setting you have things like the USSR still existing, and early stuff has like a very 80s vibe to it, because they were extrapolating into the future. But the cool part about it is that
We've gone so far in the future that you can see how right they were.
Sadly, in some ways, yes. But they kind of stuck with the setting, but the themes and the technology that they show do kind of evolve to match and extrapolate from the real world's developments, right? So it's like it's still the same timeline that exists, the same world that existed in that first edition, but the game has evolved to reflect our world, like thematically speaking, and I really appreciate that. They don't have to like retcon the entire setting to match real world timelines, but they can change how the game is played and what the game is about to match what's going on in the real world. And I mean, Mike Pondsmith's pretty good at that.
Can I mention a game that's very near and dear to my heart? It's can you guess?
Is it Fatal?
No. It's Star Trek. Star Trek Adventures.
Oh, that makes much more sense now that you say that.
If you're into D&D, and chances are, you probably are also into Star Trek. You like sci-fi. Well, you can play a Star Trek RPG, and you don't have to deal with the current crop of Paramount crap that's coming out. You know, you don't like Star Trek Picard or Star Trek. I was about to say Star Trek Beyond, but I like Star Trek Beyond. Star Trek. What's it called? Discovery. I tried to block it out of my brain.
Lower Decks.
If you don't like those shows, just make your own Star Trek show. Just have your own Star Trek game. Star Trek Adventures is great because it lets you. It has rules for all the different eras of Star Trek. If you want to play Captain Kirk era, let's give guns to cavemen ethos Star Trek, you can do that. You can play late 24th century Star Trek with the Dominion War if you really wanted to, or you could just be a random captain exploring planets that nobody in the show has even touched, because the universe is vast and the wealth of possible Star Trek adventures are limitless. Oh, you get to design your own ship too, which is fun.
I have a very important question.
Yes.
I mean, I have played the game. You ran it for us.
Yes.
But can I play as a Ferengi?
Yes. But if you're gonna play a Ferengi in my game, I would require you to memorize all the rules of acquisition and come up with your own.
Rule of acquisition, number 421. Don't invest in digital assets. If you can't bite it, you can't trust it.
This is the expanded rules after Grand Nagus ROM has expanded the rules to 600. Now you have a whole bunch of rules that you can make up on the fly.
Yes.
Yes. I love Star Trek. I love Star Trek Adventures. Play that game. Don't play D&D. Play something else.
Well, since we're on the topic of science fiction games,
Star Wars?
2 suggestions that have very different feels and for very different reasons. Okay. There are a bunch of, if you lean more Star Wars, there are a bunch of Star Wars games out there, right? There's one that's based off of 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. There's a new one from, formerly from Fantasy Flight Games that has its own kind of unique system. But if you want to play Star Wars, I highly, highly suggest play the old 1st edition West End Games D6 Star Wars system. It's very, very easy to pick up. It fits the themes of Star Wars really well, and the rules. Man, when I read it for the first time, like I have a 20th anniversary edition of it that came out back in 2016-ish. When I was reading through these rules, I'm like, man, this feels kind of like a game that could have came out today, because it's sort of rules light, but it uses its rules in cool different ways that you wouldn't expect from a game from back then. It kind of fits that more modern narrativist bent to to modern games. I like it. It's really good. Everyone I've run it with has enjoyed it. So if you like Star Wars, check it out. West End Games D6. Go with the original edition. 2nd edition and later fan editions sort of take the route of becoming more crunchy, which there's nothing wrong with it. It's not like it's overcomplicated, but
when I hear like old RPG and I think of it's crunchy, like the first thing that goes into my head is GURPS, and then I want to retch.
Yeah. It does. It's not full on GURPSy, but it does start to feel like it, because you get like a billion different skills, and you have to take different, like, for lack of a better term, merits and demerits to balance your character out. You don't need it. The 1st edition's fine. It's a perfectly playable game.
I like how you said it's not like GURPS, but you have a billion different.
It's a bit like GURPS. It is a bit like GURPS, but not quite as bad. You know, you've got a sliding scale there with GURPS on the one end and Fate on the other end, I guess. My second suggestion is a game called Traveler. Have you heard of Traveler?
Is that the one with the spaceships? Is that the one that Owen told me about?
Probably.
Okay, maybe I have.
We've been mentioning a lot of different games that have built-in settings, right? Like Warhammer Fantasy has its own setting, RuneQuest has its own setting, Star Wars, Star Trek, they're their own settings. But a lot of what draws people to D&D is the ability to make their own worlds. That's one thing that I hear from a lot of people. It's like, oh, I can just make my own fantasy world, make my own map, do this and that. And honestly, I think that's a good thing. That's a huge draw, because it kind of gets your creative juices flowing. I think a good game in the science fiction genre that does that is Traveler. Now, Traveler, again, is one of those games that has a very, very long pedigree. Like, the earliest edition was in the 70s, roughly contemporaneous with AD&D. And the most recent version of the game, I think, is like Traveler 5. I could be wrong. There's a lot of different editions. It kind of is a throwback to those earlier editions because it's not an overly complicated system, but it's really good for just generating things, and has random tables. Character creation is its own fun little mini game. In fact, that's one of the design features behind it that they had in mind, is like make different aspects of the game, like character creation or traveling and exploration or combat, their own mini games. When you think of role-playing games, right, you generally think, okay, combat is its own kind of mini game that's within the game, right? Because the rules shift when you get into combat from rules outside of combat. With Traveler, they wanted to make different parts of the game to feel like their own mini game where different skills are applicable in different ways, and it does certainly play out that way. It's really well done. This is also the game where you get this idea of dying during character creation.
What?
That's right. In early versions of Traveler, right, in every version of Traveler actually, you make a character by generating their backstory. You start off, you choose what kind of world or background your character came from. Were you like a street rat? Did you grow up on like a frontier world? Are you rich? Things like that. And you get basic stats to start off with. And then you figure out, okay, what sort of career path did they go to, right? Some characters, maybe they try to get into some fancy university, and so you have to make an intelligence test to get into that university. Or maybe they joined up or were conscripted into war, and then they spend X number of years of their backstory as a soldier, and then you roll different events that happen to them. Okay, maybe in the university they flunked out, and now they've actually lost status because of all the money they wasted on tuition. Maybe when they're in war...
Hey, I thought this was a science fiction RPG.
Well, you know what they say, the best fiction is based on real life. Maybe when they're at war, they got injured, but they were given an award because of their combat injury, sustained in the line of duty, and so now their rank has gone up, and now they can go ahead and take a different career because now they've made it in the world. So it's kind of neat. Your character is as old as you want them to be based on how many different times they go through different early life events. Young characters tend to have very low skills, but they have very, very high stats because they haven't taken injuries or aged out or things like that. Older characters tend to be more worldly. They have more equipment and starting riches because they've been building up their wealth over their lifetime already. But they also have injuries and histories that might be able to come up, like maybe they have an ex-lover, or they have a rival, or maybe they've committed a crime and there's someone hunting them down. It's really cool. Exploration has its own mini game. Avoiding like you might run into pirates, you might want to escape. There's rules for kind of generating how trading works. So if you've ever played games like Sid Meier's Pirates, have you ever played that game?
No.
Okay, or a game like Star Sector, things like that. You know, part of the game is trying to learn, okay, what's going on in these different planets or different islands, and who's at war with who, and who can I trade what with. Traveler has rules for that, and this is going all the way back to like the earliest edition, where you might go to a planet and they're having a food crisis, and so, oh hey, I just happen to have like 50 blocks of soy food. I'm going to sell these for a lot of credits. Or you might know, okay, this planet is rebelling against their overlords. Maybe I should become an illegal arms salesman. And then with all the random events that happen in the background, your campaigns can kind of grow from that, right? Maybe you get to that world that has the rebellion and you decide to become an arms trader. My point is this, it's a really fun game, and the world comes to life as you play it. That's the ideal role-playing game to me, is a game where everything's engaging, everything can become part of the setting, and you're not limited to a set setting.
Well, I want to do one final recommendation. You mentioned the game. already. It is Fate. It is a game that I thought was a completely different game at first. I heard, oh, Fate, it's like this really bad RPG, and I thought I was getting it mixed up with Fatal because they sound the same. And I thought, oh, Fatal, that's like that really weird pervert RPG, right? No, Fate's a completely different thing, and I've run it a couple of times, and it's actually really fun. Because let's say it is the complete opposite, as you said, of crunch, right? It's the opposite of like GURPS or mutants and masterminds or hero. You take the narrativist kind of spin on modern games and you take it to one of the extremes is Fate. It's a very modular system. When we ran Fate with you, we used it to make a mecha setting
Hmm.
where we use the rules, and with a little bit of work we created pilots and mechs, and we were able to use these very simple dice rolls. The game just uses d6s and is very narrative based, so you can kind of just make things up, but to a certain extent, not to the point where like the rules don't matter and progression doesn't matter at all. Actually, progression is weird in Fate because you don't really progress at the same rate. You kind of progress at the rate that you do in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, which is not very fast. Because the your power should come more from your imagination and the way that you use your powers rather than getting experience points. It's a really fun system that's really modular. You can use it for anything, from mecha sci-fi to fantasy to superheroes. And if you want something that's like completely opposite from D&D, instead of all these different dice rolls, D10 percentage dice, D10s, D20s, what's the other dice that they use in D&D?
Use all of them.
I was about to say 16, but it's 64 that I was thinking of. Yeah, you have all these different dice in D&D. In Fate, you just have your D6s. You can get special Fate die because it doesn't use all 6 sides of the die. It's real. I don't really want to get into it because there's so much to it to explain it would require its own video. But if you are looking for like the complete opposite of crunchy D&D stuff, try Fate. Look it up. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I had fun with it. I enjoyed releasing the Death Force onto unsuspecting Earth.
That is the if I'm my memory isn't the best, but I believe that's the one where somebody was drinking paint.
That was me. I drank paint by accident. I thought it was an elixir of strength.
I think the idea was that there was like an evil scientist who was trying to revive giant mechs from ancient Greece. For some reason, you drank paint. That's all I remember of running that game, is that you drank paint.
I drank paint, but I did release the Death Force, and that's...
And killed everybody on the planet by accident.
Oh no, it was on purpose.
Okay.
As you can see, there's a lot of different options, a lot of different genres, and different kinds of rules, right? There's crunchier systems, there's more narrative systems.
There's crunch and narrative in the same genre, like Shadowrun and Cyberpunk.
Yeah. You can have games that are set in different media settings you already know, like Star Wars or Star Trek. There's games that have their own settings that are rather rich for them, like RuneQuest or Warhammer Fantasy.
Or
and
the World of Darkness, which we won't get into in this video.
But if you're listening to us, you probably have heard of it. I mean, that's another good example, World of Darkness has its own setting that people like because of its own setting, and Chronicles of Darkness is a game that is more open with what the setting is and, lets you craft it as you want to see it. Just because the exarchs of the coast want to wring everyone out for as much money as they can, they want to monetize D&D as much as possible, and, make you pay $30 to have an AI generate your adventure for you.
What?
Did you hear about that?
No.
Oh, that's very recent. Yeah. They the people were apparently on the D&D Reddit. Wizards was footing different ideas of how to attract people back to D&D Beyond because so many people were unsubscribing from that service thanks to the new OGL kerfuffle. And one of the things that they kind of fielded to their dwindling audience was, hey, what if you could, I don't know, get an AI dungeon master who can generate and run the adventure for you and your friends, and that way you don't need a dungeon master. How would you like that for $30 a month?
It already exists. It's called NovelAI, and it costs half that.
Oh yeah, but the idea is they're going to make it special for D&D and only for subscribers. Yes.
Yikes. Yeah, so let's say you don't like the Wizards of the Coast anymore. You do want to boycott them, but you don't want to give up playing RPGs, right? There's just so many other options. Just don't play D&D. Like, I think your life would just be so much happier if you didn't, because you could still maintain your moral superiority and brag on Twitter about how you aren't supporting such an evil company, and you'll
Just
be
have fun.
and you'll be playing a better game while you do it. And the most fun is the bragging on Twitter thing. I think that's the thing that most people live for. Certainly I do.
I mean, these days, does anything else matter? You know?
It makes me feel like a big man.
Yeah,
we laugh, but it's true. Let's be honest, right? Let's be honest. It's true.
What about when you do that thing that makes you feel like God?
When I take a woman into the woods and give her cheese sandwiches?
This topic could go on for days because there is just so many good games out there. All of them, geared to whatever flavor of fiction or story or gameplay that you want. And most of them are good too.
They're just waiting for you to actually go out and try them. Don't be afraid. Don't think, oh, well, I only know D&D. I can't try these other games because then I'd have to learn, I'd have to read. Try something like Prowlers and Paragons. It's like a 30-page book. It doesn't take long. Do some one-shots. Instead of thinking, let's do a whole campaign, let's gather friends. Just get together for a week. Do a one-shot of a new RPG. Everyone will be on the same page. Nobody will know what they're doing, but you're going to have a lot of fun doing it.
And if you still want a system that's recognizable to you, by all means, pick up an OSR retro clone, right? Old School Essentials, or Lamentations of the Flame Princess, or something like Worlds Without Number, or even Stars Without Number for another sci-fi pick.
As I alluded to at the start of the video, we will be talking more about RPGs, specifically Werewolf the Forsaken. If just the name sounds evocative and interesting to you, tune in the 6 months it'll take for us to do that video. And once again, just don't play D&D. Try something else.
This episode is brought to you by Roleplaying. From another time, another land. Play Fatal today.